All right. Welcome to all of you, both here and on live stream. And tonight we're going to be looking at this third and final conflict, how the time of the end conflict of Daniel 11 is already in progress. By the time we're done here, it is my intention that you will never watch the news quite the same again in your life. Lots of people have somewhat given up on watching the news because it's always so horrible, right? I see it differently. I see one signpost after another that's saying, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming, because we're clicking by the markers that God gave to happen before Jesus returns. And that is exciting to me. So we're looking at the third and final conflict. I'm going to just give a brief review because we've got a couple of folks that haven't been here before. Oh yes, one other thing. If anybody has an interest in inviting me to any church or group during a daytime or especially like sometime on Sunday, not evenings, this church has me all the evenings, okay? But I'll go to any of those other places for free as long as we can fit it into my schedule. And so be happy to do that. There's a king of the north and a king of the south in conflict in Daniel chapter 11. In Daniel in 2 and 7, the first king of the north was the Babylonian Empire. They came into Jerusalem from the north. Then the Medes and the Persians came in from the north. And then the Greeks came in from the north. And the Greek Empire splits 4 ways, but he only cares about a north and a south. Seleucid north, Ptolemy south, they fight back and forth, and Jerusalem's caught in the middle. From this time on, both Jerusalem and God's people are caught in the middle. And then the Roman Empire comes in from the north. And the Roman Empire splits multiple ways. And again, he only cares about 2, north and south. And you have papal-led Christian north, Islamic south, and Jerusalem got caught in the middle. There are 3 conflicts: the Crusades, the Ottomans, and the time of the end. We have entered the third and final round of this. In Revelation, by the way, there are 3 woes. And from 1100 to the 1930s, almost all Bible commentators believed it to be Islam and Christianity in conflict. There's 3 and 3, and they match. Some people ask me, is the God of Islam and the God of Christianity the same? Be careful how you answer that. Here's why. Jesus said his true disciples would love their enemies and do good to those who persecute them. So the simple question would be, was it the jihadists or the crusaders that loved their enemies and did good to the other side? Neither one did. And so here's your answer. There are many Muslims and many Christians who are worshiping the same false god of force, fear, and anger. Do it our way or else. However, there are some Christians and some Muslims who have found or are in search of the same true God of love, truth, peace, and forgiveness. And by the time we're done tonight, I'm going to be showing you from Daniel 11 how there is a group of Christians and a group of Muslims that come together to follow Jesus as their Lord and Savior and the Bible as their authority, and that is definitely not Chrislam. Okay? Because they're following Jesus as their Savior and the Bible as their authority. All right? Now, I need to say this. No political party saves you. Only Jesus saves you. No politician saves you. Only Jesus saves you. No church or culture saves you. Only Jesus saves you. God's people get caught in the middle because Jesus didn't give you permission to hate anyone. And if you love both sides, neither side's really going to love you. If you doubt it, was it the Sadducees or Pharisees that loved Jesus? Neither one. He got caught in the middle, and he's our example. Now, I am an equal opportunity offender. If you lean hard right or hard left, I'm likely to step on your toes this evening. However, I will be getting the other side too, so relax about that. All right? So, logic and feeling. If you talk to conservative people, they're talking about the bleeding heart liberals over there. And the liberals are talking about those hard-headed, fact-oriented conservatives. I have a simple question. Which do you need, logic or feeling in your life? You're going to get caught in the middle if you think you want both of them. I'm telling you, you're going to be caught in the middle if you're really following Jesus. All right? Bad news is really good news, because the bad news is the warning signs or the alert signs that Jesus is coming. We're getting closer to his coming. And Jesus taught us to love and not hate. If you came looking for an excuse to hate somebody, you're not getting it here. By the way, I will tell you this. If you hate Muslims, you're going to follow the King of the North all the way to his and your own destruction. Then again, if you hate anybody, you're headed for destruction. Some definitions you need to know. Caliphate. A caliphate is ruled by a caliph who claims global political and religious power. This is a Muslim global government that they want to have. And their goal is to establish this government worldwide. And they will convert everyone to Islam or kill them eventually. And once everybody's Muslim of the right kind, then there will be peace. That's the goal of the caliphate. But there's also a pope or a papacy. It's ruled by a pope who claims global political and religious power. If these guys both claim global and political religious power, there's not room on the same planet for both of them. Every time we have both of them existing on the planet at the same time, there's a holy war. Arab Caliphate's crusades, Ottoman Caliphate, the Ottoman conflict with the Holy League. Time of the end is the third and final caliphate and the third and final holy war. And my definition of a holy war is when both sides act like the devil in the name of God. And when you act like the devil, you are not of God. Now, Islamists are the radicals who want to bring about a global caliphate. They want to establish this global caliphate with its capital in the place they call Al-Quds. You call it Jerusalem. Let's see, if Daniel says Jerusalem is going to get caught in the middle, and all the radical Muslims want to make Jerusalem the capital of their global caliphate, do you think there's a chance it could get caught in the middle? It's just about guaranteed, isn't it? These radicals include the Muslim Brotherhood, which came out of Egypt in the 1920s, and they're the foundation of all the radical Muslims. By the way, the Palestinians are basically Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, Erdogan of Turkey, Iran, and others. They all want to take Jerusalem as the global caliphate. Does that start adding reason for what you've been watching on the news in the last few days? The moderate Muslims are those who are opposed to a caliphate by force. And some of these have been joining the Abrahamic Accords. And it includes so far United Arab Emirates, Sudan, Bahrain, Morocco, and Oman. Now, these are still shifting some, all right? It's not locked in on who's on what side. But I will tell you there's already a fight to the death going on within Islam between the moderates and the radicals. I mean, there's been lots and lots of people that have died. Remember a guy by the name of Khashoggi? Went into the Saudi consulate in Turkey and was dismembered in little pieces? A journalist? Do you know what the American media did not tell you? They did not tell you he was a Muslim Brotherhood sympathizer and friend of a guy by the name of Osama bin Laden, a radical Islamist, and the government of Saudi Arabia did not agree with the radicals. Doesn't make what they did right, but maybe you understand it a little bit. It's part of this fight to the death between moderate and radical Islam. Now, we're going to look at current events and how it is fulfilling these verses tonight. This is the time of the end conflict or holy war between the king of the north and the king of the south, verses 40 to 43. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, the king of the north. In our last presentation, I showed you, and if you missed it, you can go back. Don't have time to explain the whole thing. But I showed how the king of the south is Islam, the caliphate, and its allies are the radical left that come out of the French Revolution, which is based on my understanding of Revelation 11. So the king of the south and their allies will attack the king of the north. That's the papacy and their allies, especially the United States. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land. And not that I think this is going to happen right at this moment, but at this moment, there's a U.S. carrier task force headed straight towards Israel. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. That's western Jordan. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at the king of the north's heels. So Islam, the king of the south, splits three ways. Egypt and many countries, radical Islam, go down. Radical Islam came from Egypt in 1920. The moderate Muslims follow papal-led Christianity, and I'm saving the best for last, and show you how there's a group of Muslims that follow Jesus in the Bible. Edom, Moab, and Ammon, the ones that are escape. Edom, Moab, and Ammon, get this, are Abrahamic family members. Sons of Abraham. Or relatives of Abraham, I should say. The question is, could it happen? Could you have this kind of a holy war between the king of the north and the king of the south? Well, let me just tell you a little bit about different viewpoints. End of the world viewpoints of Sunni Muslims. This is the Muslim Brotherhood. And Palestinians are part of this group. There will be a war in Syria. And folks, there's been a war in Syria going on for a long time. And they think that was it. Out of that, the world will go into chaos, and God will help them win a war, and the whole world will become Muslim. Jesus will show up and help them conquer Al-Quds, Jerusalem. Well, actually, they get Al-Quds. Jesus shows up, and he takes out the Dajjal, which is an Antichrist-type character. And Islam has control of the world. Shia Muslims, which are Iranian, believe a 12th Imam will show up, which is a holy man that went down a well back in the 9th or 10th century. And he's going to come back out of the well, and he's going to lead them to victory in a time of great chaos. So the Iranian government feels that they need to get this world into chaos so that God can rescue them. Does that start to explain a few things? Now, this was back in 2012. The Muslim Brotherhood Supreme Guide, Muhammad Badia, confirmed the necessity for every Muslim to strive to save Al-Quds from the hands of the rapist and to cleanse Palestine from the clutches of the occupation, deeming this an individual duty for all Muslims. The Israelis are the rapist, although you just watched it going the other way. And it's the job of every Muslim to save the land of Palestine from the Israelites, the Jewish people. Does it help explaining what you're seeing? The Iranian-Syrian crisis prelude to coming of the Mahdi, the 12th Imam. A high Iranian politician believes the Syrian revolution could be the catalyst for sparking a worldwide conflagration that will usher in an era of Muslim domination of the world. And the Syrian conflict has catapulted Iran as the chaos maker of the Middle East. Prophecies of Mary predict an Islamic Antichrist. Book Thunder of Justice, written right before the year 2000, indicating that several things were going to happen and Jesus was going to set up his kingdom about the year 2000. That didn't happen. It's a Roman Catholic book. But these prophecies of Mary, there was a very interesting one. In it, that they believe that there is going to be a Muslim Antichrist, and it just sounds like a description of the 12th Imam. Then there's many evangelicals and talk show hosts are now teaching that the Antichrist will be Muslim, just like Mary did. Supposedly Mary, okay? And these dreams and visions that some of these Catholic prophets or seers have had. Glenn Beck, Waleed Shoebat, Joel Richardson, Joel Roosenberg, and others all see a role of a Islamic Antichrist. Now, we have Daniel 11:40-43, that Islam and its allies attack the papacy. And we have a three-way division of Islam after the papacy and its allies strike back. The three parts are those who escape, Egypt and many other countries that are overthrown, and those who follow after the king of the north. In other words, they say, hey, we don't like radical Islam either. We'll cooperate with the Christian world. Almost every conflict, there have been some Muslims that have done that. Let's take a look at an old map. Here's Egypt. I do believe that Egypt will further radicalize and go down. Does anybody here know who won the last really free election in Egypt? Mohammed Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, the radical Muslim candidate that wants to conquer Israel. But a year later, less than a year later, the Egyptian military overthrew him, and there hasn't been a free election since. Oh, there have been elections. But whoever runs against El-Sisi runs from a prison cell. Huh. That sounds interesting, doesn't it? You put the opposition in prison before the election. If you were to have a free election today, after what just happened in Palestine and Israel with the Palestinians, the Brotherhood would probably win again. Libya, North Africa, several countries. Actually, some of these are the ones joining the Abrahamic Accords normalizing relations with Israel. Ethiopia, down here. And ancient Ethiopia was this whole area. Many of these would actually like to work together with the Christian world, and they're tired of radical Islam. And so it's already kind of shaping up like Daniel saw. I do expect Egypt to do a turnaround, but how might this happen? The U.S. rises to support the King of the North, and out of the French Revolution comes Marxist socialism, which is supportive of the King of the South. That's what I presented last night. All these powers arise in the late 1700s, and by the mid-1800s, everything was in place. What does that tell me? The time of the end conflict could have happened any time since then. We've basically been living on the verge. We're living in the time of the end during this time period when Jesus could come at any time. We need to be ready. In 2011, I wrote a book, Islam and Christianity and Prophecy. I had some expectations. I had studied it very carefully and how it had been fulfilled without ever missing a detail as written for 2,500 years. Starting in Daniel's time, never misses a detail, and it's in sequence. And I figured if I just keep using the same methods and move into the future, I can get a general idea of what's coming. And so I said, there's going to be a radical Islam that angers the papacy. Well, I saw a radical Islam, a moderate Islam, and a group that follows Jesus in the prophecy. I now understand that radical Islam to be the caliphate people. The papacy would call for war against radical Islam. The United States and its allies would be the military enforcer. Radical Islam would be overthrown. Moderate Islam would follow the papacy, and some Muslims would follow Jesus in the Bible. In 2011, that wasn't happening. This is what I was saying was coming. In 2014, it began to happen and just click off one right after another, which tells me we're entering the whirlwind of the time of the end. And what I'm going to show you now, beginning in 2014, in date order, is how the whirlwind has been unfolding. All right? To have a king of the north versus king of the south conflict, you have to have a king of the south, a caliphate, a caliph. We hadn't had one since the Ottoman Empire, a functioning one. But on July 1, 2014, in print, a functioning caliphate was introduced. The Islamic State. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the caliph, the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic State stretching across Iraq and Syria, has vowed to lead the conquest of Rome as he called on Muslims to immigrate to his new land to fight under its banner around the globe. Now remember, I'd said that there's going to be a radical Islam that angers the Pope, and the Pope will call for war. Day one of the King of the South existence, he says, I'm after Rome, the King of the North. Oh, that was convenient. I didn't know it was going to be that blatant, but it was. The next question is, how long would it take for the papal King of the North to call for war? I mean, the Pope is the man of peace, right? Unless you know the history. But that's what he likes to be called. It only took 5.5 weeks for the Pope to call for war. August 7, 2014. Pope Francis appealed to world leaders on Thursday to help end the crisis in northern Iraq after a sweeping advance by radical Islamic State militants forced thousands of residents of Iraq's biggest Christian town to flee their homes. His Holiness addresses an urgent appeal to the international community to take action. He was calling for military action to end the humanitarian tragedy now underway. The very next day, Obama comes out and says, America is coming to help. Within 36 hours of the papal call for action, the United States began attacking the Islamic State for the first time. That should put us into the third and final holy war, which is called the whirlwind. Once the King of the North, the Pope, calls for action. The Pope called for action, we have the Crusades. He calls for action, you have the Holy League against the Ottomans. He calls for action, you should have the third and final round. I mean, it's just Daniel is just so systematic, boom, 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 right through, all the way. Now, some of the American media began to say, oh man, the United States didn't really listen to the Pope. He was probably wanting humanitarian action, not military action when he called for action. So this is 6 days after the papal call for action, and the United States has been hitting the Islamic State for a couple of days now. And the Pope comes out and says, oh, no, I really did want military action. The Holy See's ambassador to the United Nations, Silvano Tomasi, this weekend supported U.S. airstrikes aimed at halting the advance of Sunni Islamic State militants, calling for intervention now before it's too late. While the Vatican vocally disapproved of the U.S.-led campaign in Iraq in 2003 and the 2013 plan for airstrikes on Syria, fearing both might make the situation worse for Christians on the ground, fears of ethnic cleansing by Islamists, the Caliphate people that want to set up their capital in Al-Quds, Jerusalem, has forced a policy change. Daniel 11 says the king of the south pushes and forces the king of the north to come back. That's exactly what the papacy just admitted happened. Then Jihani John starts calling the United States and Obama the dog of Rome. The United States is the attack dog for Rome. Interesting. The United States and the Vatican worked together to bring down communism in 1990, but it's reared back up again. They worked together to bring down the Islamic State, but it's rearing back up again. What do you expect they're going to do? They'll come together, fight both of them together now, eventually. And according to the Huffington Post, but shrewdly, methodically, and with a showman's flair, the soft-spoken 78-year-old Argentinian Jesuit priest named Pope Francis showed Thursday that he is running to become president of the planet. He came to the U.S. Congress and spoke to a joint session of Congress. Not very many people get that opportunity. He went from there up to the UN and spoke at the UN. Putin was there, Obama was there, but who pulls the coverage of the press? The Pope does. So who's the important one? The one that gets the coverage. Get this. In the Crusades, there's a violent form of Islam on the march, and the world unites behind the papacy to stop it. During the Ottomans, there's a violent form of Islam that's on the march, and the world unites behind the papacy to stop it. What do you think's going to happen in our modern world when there's a violent form of Islam on the march? Every time there's a violent form of Islam on the march, the papacy rises in power to counter it. It's happening all over again. We are in the third and final round. Mass migration crisis, and it may get worse. I don't think this wave can stop, said Sonia Licht of the International Center for Democratic Transition. The global north must be prepared that the global south is on the move, the entire global south. This is not just a problem for Europe, but for the whole world. Oh, out of the Middle East, war-torn Middle East, refugees are streaming into Europe. And from there, they're streaming into the United States. The southern border is where most of them cross, right? The south is pushing in to the north. I was amazed when I realized what the recent definition was of the global south. You might think it's south of the equator. No. There's an economist that came up with a term called BRICS. There's a group of nations that are trying to put together a currency group where they trade in something other than dollars. And he came up with the name BRICS for Brazil, Russia, China, Iran, and their friends. They are also interchangeably called the global south. Anybody want to tell me where Russia and China are? They're definitely in the northern hemisphere. Russia and China go way up into the northern hemisphere. But they're considered the global south. In my last presentation, I showed you how the radical left, Marxist socialism, has united with radical Islam against the Christian world. And so the South is pushing on the North in many ways. And during his election, in the Donald Trump was asked, what about radical Islam? He said, the point is they want to do serious harm. We have to take them out. We have to take them out very, very swiftly and viciously if necessary. We've got to destroy the brand of jihad. And Daniel says, Egypt and many, radical Islam will be overthrown. Oh, that was exactly what he had in mind, but he didn't finish the job. He or somebody like him will come back in to finish the job. We've already been given a glimpse of what might happen. During his inauguration, he said, we will reinforce old alliances and form new ones. Who was it Trump was forming new alliances with? The Abrahamic Accord people, moderate Muslims that he could get to sign up to fight against radical Islam for him. Daniel has that split between radical Islam and moderate Islam. Trump was forging that division. And unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. And someday, according to the prophecy, it will happen. Then Trump said he was going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, the U.S. Embassy, and recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Okay. What do you think that's going to do to Muslims who want to make that their global capital? It is going to set them off. Notice, 6 days later, there's a meeting in Turkey of people who are really, really upset about it. They're all the Islamists that want to make Jerusalem their world capital. This gets said. Soleimani, commander of the Al-Quds force, says his nation is ready to support Palestinian forces in the Gaza Strip days after the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. What is the Muslim name for Jerusalem? Al-Quds. Soleimani is commander of the Iranian Al-Quds force, their special forces that are named after Jerusalem. Implication? They're training and preparing to conquer Jerusalem. Get a little idea why Israel does not like Iran, especially since the leaders keep saying they're going to wipe Israel off the face of the map. They've said that many times in the last couple of days. But get this, the Iranians are Shiite Muslims and the Palestinians are Sunni Muslims. They normally fight against each other. But when Trump said he was going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital, the Iranians said, we're going to arm them. Anybody know where the weapons and arms came from to attack Israel? Iran. Largely from Iran. Now, this was no bluff. And Soleimani is the commander of the Al-Quds force, the second most powerful man in Iran at the time. Here's a picture of him. This is an Iranian propaganda picture. I've collected several of them over the years. He's holding a radio in his hand. He's calling in a strike on the White House. Bombs going off, the U.S. flag is falling, and a little bit of English over here you can read says, "We will crush the USA under our feet." Anybody know who lived in the second story of the White House at that time? Donald Trump. Look at his windows. It's a direct hit on his living quarters. Smoke is blasting out of the windows. What do you know about Donald Trump? If you threaten him, will he tend to remember? Yeah. How do you like to be Soleimani? Then, I got a really good explanation of what a radical and a moderate Muslim is. Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, gave it. He was talking about this in two different articles, and one from the Jerusalem Post, one from the Atlantic Monthly. Saudi Arabia's powerful crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has described Turkey as part of a triangle of evil, along with Iran and hardline Islamist groups. The Saudi prince also accused Turkey of trying to reinstate the Islamic Caliphate, abolished nearly a century ago when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. In this triangle, this is now the Atlantic, they are trying to promote the idea that our duty as Muslims is to reestablish the Caliphate, that the glory of Islam is in building an empire by force. We have no duty anymore to fight to spread Islam. But in the triangle of evil, they want to manipulate Muslims to tell them their duty as Muslims requires the establishment of a Muslim empire. Then he says something that is absolutely earth-shaking to the Middle East. I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land. Do you know what the Palestinian saying is? That they will fight until the land is liberated from the river to the sea. In other words, there's no Jewish or Israelite presence left in the region. He just said the Israelis have a right to have their own land. There was gunfire in the palace within a few days, an assassination attempt, but he survived it. But we have to have a peace agreement to assure the stability for everyone to have normal relations. From this point on, the Saudi prince has been trying to establish normalizations with Israel. May 14, 2018, the U.S. Embassy is opened in Jerusalem about a year and a half, 2 years earlier than expected. The reason? May 14 was exactly 70 years from the founding of the nation of Israel. Take a look at the coin. A group of Israelis came up with this coin. They're the temple group, the ones that want to rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount. In the background, you have Cyrus the Great, who after 70 years of Babylonian captivity told the Jews, Jerusalem is yours, and they ended up rebuilding the temple. After 70 years of statehood, Trump said, Jerusalem is yours, and they end up rebuilding the temple, they think. Do you know what happens if Israelites go up on the Temple Mount and pray? People will die in the riot that follows. What if they try and build a temple up there? We have a very volatile place called Jerusalem, especially the Temple Mount. Anybody ever been up on the Temple Mount? I've been in the Dome of the Rock and walked around up there one time. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. And by the way, if looks could kill, I'd be dead. But they have people with machine guns and grenade launchers standing by that kill anybody that starts killing somebody. That's kind of the way it works up there. Then shortly thereafter, the Vatican and the Gulf have a common enemy. The subtitle, The Meaning of the Pope's Historic Visit to the United Arab Emirates. It's really important you notice this is the Pope visiting with Muslims. Remember I said that some of the Muslims are going to follow with the Pope? Papal-led Christianity, the King of the North? It's not just the United States and NATO, it includes the Pope in that. What has changed in brief is the dual rise of the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamic State. The following analysis applies equally to the Emirates and to Saudi Arabia. Facing direct challenges, the Gulf states calculated that they could no longer appease Islamists and should instead crush them. That is precisely what they have done both in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. The institutional authorities of Islam and the political authorities with which they are aligned have just bought themselves an institutional ally. Who did they just ally with? The Pope. They signed agreements in there, if not a theological one. Whether the alliance keeps the theological barbarians at bay is another question. United Arab Emirates. Just a little bit of time later, They're the first one to sign a normalization agreement with Israel. Another Iranian picture pops up. You have American and Israeli ships smoking and sinking. It's the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. What is the focal point of the picture? The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Why are they sinking ships and causing mayhem all over the world? Because they want Jerusalem. But then again, look closely at the water. It's not water, is it? It's a Palestinian headscarf. Why would the Shiite Muslims be arming Palestinians that are Sunni? Because they want to get Al-Quds. The Iranians are simply telling you they're doing all this stuff, including using the Palestinians, just as a tool to get Al-Quds. A picture should be worth 1,000 words. By the way, they say the same things anyway, so that's not a big guess on my part. However, the State Department has never been able to figure this out. They keep thinking that Iran will be rational and the Palestinians will be rational. You give them a little land, they'll be happy. No, they want the whole world. They won't be stopping. As long as politicians are secular politicians and don't understand a religious viewpoint, it's going to be chaos. Then Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was killed. The king of the south, the caliph, was killed. They just named a new one. Then January 3, 2020, Soleimani was blown to little tiny pieces. I mean, literally, little tiny pieces. A drone strike outside the Baghdad airport. One president after another had been told by intelligence, we could take him out if you want, and they all said, no, that would cause too much trouble. When Trump got the opportunity, he said, take him out. And he was gone. What had happened a couple of days before, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad had been attacked. And on the walls, the attackers had written, Soleimani sent us. And that was the last straw for Donald Trump. He had been threatened. Remember the picture? The U.S. Embassy has been attacked, and he heard there were more attacks planned. He said, no, take him out. And he was gone. January 7, 4 days later, the United States and Iran went to war. You may not remember it, but the headline said the United States and Iran had gone to war that night. This was Drudge Report, which just takes world headlines from around the world. I'm going to show you one from this last Saturday, too, with just a few of the leading headlines. And these were the leading headlines that night. It's war. Iran targets U.S. troops. Missiles fired at bases. Fierce revenge has begun. The name of the operation for Iran was Fierce Revenge. They had said that they were going to strike U.S. targets from Iran. It wouldn't go through somebody else. They were personally going to kill American troops. Donald Trump said, no, you shouldn't do that. He said, here's why. If you kill one American in your counterattack, one American, know that there are 58 missiles with targets already dialed in, aimed at you. One for each hostage of the Jimmy Carter Iranian hostage crisis. Trump likes to use symbolism. So do the Muslims, so they get it. He said, you also ought to know what the targets are. They include military. They include religious and cultural targets. What do you know about NATO targeting? Military targets and you try hard not to take out a cultural or religious target. And Trump just said, I've got him on the first round. You're going to lose religious and cultural places. Do you know what Trump was announcing? If you're going to fight a holy war, you're going to get a holy war back. When both sides act like the devil in the name of God. They launched their attack. You know how many Americans died? American bases were pounded with missiles. 50 to 100 Americans were so close to bombs blowing up that they got concussions. That's serious enough right there. That can be life-changing. But guess how many Americans died? None. How do you do that? So close that 50 to 100 Americans have concussions and you kill nobody. I have an explanation. In the Bible, it says that God is holding back the winds of strife until his people are ready. The world was primed to go to war that night. They actually announced that it's war between the United States and Iran. Because they knew Americans would die and they knew Trump would launch. But no Americans died and Trump held fire. And the Iranians didn't want to try it a second time. Their fierce revenge is now going to take place through killing Americans through other countries' forces. You know what that tells me? That God's people weren't ready. Because we came right up to the world exploding in war, and it went down. The Muslims hadn't changed. Alaska Mosque, that's up at the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount. Siam can be seen, the preacher there can be seen telling the enthusiastic crowd that 3 prophecies would soon be fulfilled. That the rightly guided caliphate will be established. One of the rare times it actually says Jerusalem instead of Al-Quds, but notice it's not a Western paper, it's an Israeli paper. The Western papers hide the real function. They don't tell you that the radicals are after Jerusalem. They say Al-Quds. Israelis want you to know that Jerusalem will be liberated and established as its capital, and that Islam achieves world domination. There's their goal. They hadn't changed it yet. And then we had COVID-19. Voila! Radical Islam was gone, according to the Western media. Now all you had to do is worry about COVID. I'm here to tell you that radical Islam was spreading all over the world during this time when nobody was reporting on it. The Islamic State had lost their territory in Iraq and Syria that they controlled, but they now operate in many areas as far south as Mozambique, south of the equator in Africa. This was just one. You can go to jihadwatch.com and you can get a listing. And so as it disappeared off the media, I decided to go there one time right before a seminar in June of 2020. Burkina Faso, Muslims murder 58 people in attacks targeting Christians. Red-green Twitter storm to America, burn baby burn. Philadelphia Muslim cleric says demonstrations are useless, fighting and bloodshed are needed. What is going on? The radical Muslims are now teaming up with the radical left, Antifa and Black Lives Matter all around the United States. Red-green Twitter storm. Red, Marxist socialist, green, Muslim. And you had the left exchanging demonstrators with the Palestinians, and you get the same demonstrators going back and forth between Palestinian demonstrations and Black Lives Matter demonstrations, etc. And they're coming out in the open that they're working together. I can trace it back into the 60s. But in 2020, man, it came out in the open. You had the world almost explode in war, and now the King of the South Alliance is exposed, and it's going to expose the King of the North Alliance as well. The next time around is going to be really fierce. The political left leans south towards Islam, the right leans north towards traditional Christianity. I want to show you the similarities between radical Islam and the radical left. They both hate Israel. You did know the radical left hates Israel, right? Ever heard of Ben & Jerry's ice cream? There's some leftist guys that run that. They don't even like their ice cream being sold to Israelis because they don't want any business done with Israel because Israel is so horrendous. Muslims are fine. Israelis are awful. In May of 2021, there was an 11-day missile shooting match between the Palestinians and Israel. It was intended to break up the Abrahamic Accords, but here's what happened. Radical Muslims and radical left all over the world sided with the Palestinians. Alexandria Cortez and her group called the Squad sided with the Palestinians in the US Congress. Radical Muslims sided with the Palestinians. The moderate Muslims quietly sided with Israel. The moderate left quietly sided with Israel. The split of Daniel 11 was happening. Both radical Islam and the radical left hate capitalism. 2020, thousands of Americans became socialist. It was strange, the stuff going on. Both the radical left and radical Islam hate papal-led Christianity. Crisis Magazine, a conservative Catholic magazine, wrote, "Not since the Cold War have we experienced such violent political, cultural, and spiritual unrest. Not since the Civil War has our country been divided so bitterly against itself. Our civilization is under attack from the far left within and radical Islam without." The King of the North knew who their enemies were. It's an alliance of the left and radical Islam. Radical left out of Revelation 11, Islam out of Daniel 11. The King of the South Alliance. They both hate American exceptionalism. One says death to America, the other says down with America in their street demonstrations. Not a lot of difference. Oh, and here we have radical Muslims, Iran, Quds Force, helping Venezuela with troops and weapons. Venezuela is a Marxist country. What is a Marxist, atheistic country doing working together with Islam? Very simple saying in the Middle East explains it very well. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. They both hate traditional Christian countries. And the United States is what they call the big Satan. Israel's the little Satan. They like and dislike the same groups of politicians. It was interesting when Soleimani died, radical Muslims and radical left, even in the US Congress, were angry. Moderate left and moderate Muslims were quietly happy. Oh, and the right was happy as well. They both like social justice with an exception. It's the LGBTQ exception. Have you ever heard of Islamophobia and homophobia? The left will accuse you of all kinds of things if they think that they can put a label on you to make you be quiet. But here's the interesting thing. Both radical Islam and radical left talk about social justice. Can anybody tell me what a radical Muslim does to a homosexual? They kill them. Here's the hilarious thing. Sad but hilarious. You'll get leftist groups, many of which are homosexuals, out protesting in favor of the Islamists, the Palestinians. But if the Palestinians were to take control, they would kill the homosexuals. But the left doesn't seem to understand. I'll illustrate it this way. On the day that the United States Supreme Court legalized homosexual marriage, there was a hashtag that went out called Love Wins on Twitter. A group of Muslims decided to release a video under that hashtag. They took 4 homosexual men up on a tall building in the Middle East, held them by their ankles over the street below, and let go. And they filmed the results. All 4 men died on impact. Love wins. Okay, here's a simple question. Who would be happy? Or who would be angry? The political left in our country or the political right? Who should come to the defense and say that's wrong to kill homosexuals? You would think the left would, but they went silent. Why? You do not expose the sins of your allies. You spin it. You try to make excuses for your allies. So guess who exposes that it's wrong? The right. They were more than happy to point out that the Muslims were wrong in doing that and the left was wrong in being quiet. When something like this happens, you can tell who the allies are very quickly. When Israel is attacked this last weekend, pay attention to who has a bold condemnation of the Muslims, of the Palestinian terrorists, and those who agree with them, and then notice who goes quiet and just tries to say something that doesn't bother either side. Those will be allies as well of the Palestinian radicals. You'll see that in a bit. This was interesting. In Canada, school official prevents students from attending book club event with author who survived ISIS sex slavery over concerns it would foster Islamophobia. So you have a left-leaning school board that says, no, we can't let people know what the Islamic State did to their sex slaves because they might not like Muslims afterwards. Okay? Meanwhile, there were 50 Canadian churches being vandalized and burned. And the left, and by the way, the Canadian news organization is very left-leaning. In this last, well, I'm not going to go there. I don't have time. What had happened is you had Catholic churches and old line churches that were being attacked and literally burned to the ground, some of them, because of what had happened to some Native Americans a century or more ago. And the media was stirring up the hatred of the churches, and then the churches were being burned, and the media was saying, well, the churches had it coming. What would have happened if a couple of mosques would have been attacked and burned? Okay, friends. Can you not see that the left, radical left and radical Islam are united? They both hate traditional Christianity. They're the allies. Domestic terrorist group Jane's Revenge threatens escalated violence against pro-life ministries, mostly Roman Catholic. Not all, but mostly. From here forward, any anti-choice group who closes their doors and stops operating will no longer be a target. But until you do, it's open season. We know where your operations are. The infrastructure of the enslavers will not survive. We will never stop, back down, slow down, or retreat, Jane's Revenge declared. Through attacking, we find joy, courage, and strip the veneer of impenetrability held by these violent institutions. You are a violent institution if you try and save unborn babies. You are a wonderful place if you violently attack them. Definitions get weird, don't they? They make this threat. They attack and burn crisis pregnancy centers. And the Department of Justice goes in, takes the video away from the pregnancy centers of their security cameras so that they can't even see their own video, and nobody gets arrested, even though there's video. Interesting how that might happen. But here's the bottom line. Both the radical left and radical Islam believe that Jesus is just a good man, but not God. And the Bible is just a book. It's not your authority for life. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the radical left and radical Islam are there. Now, if you were to go to Voice of the Martyrs, who tracks what's going on around the world, you would find that they have two lists of nations. One is restricted, where there's actually laws outlawing Christianity. There's others where it's hostile. There are no laws against Christianity, but the government looks the other way when Christians are persecuted. Hostile is many times worse than restricted. Neither's good. All right? But when you look at the list of countries, 47 countries are controlled by Islamists, where Christians are being persecuted. 11 countries are Marxist. All other countries combined are 4. Hey, who's the major persecutors of Christians? Islamists with their allies, the Marxists. Daniel 11 and Revelation 11 don't miss, folks. We are living in the fulfillment of what it said to watch for. Biden comes into the White House. It emboldens radical Islam. Whenever you have a left-leaning president, it is kind of their ally. Right-leaning president, they come under attack. Just think back through history. That's the way it plays. Pentagon ramps up attacks on resurgent ISIS. It is not defeated. Civil war brewing in France. You have radical Islam and Frenchmen, and it's getting really bad there. Nigeria, Muslims murder 3,462 Christians in the first 200 days of 2021. There's typically 2,000 or 3,000 Christians killed by Muslims every year in Nigeria. 2021 was just worse than normal. How many times do you hear of Muslims killing Christians in Nigeria? Did you hear about Israel being attacked this last weekend? It's horrendous. There's about 1,000 Israelis that died in that. That count may still go up. And there are about 3,000 injured, is the count that I last knew. But I know of one terror attack in Nigeria where 2,000 people were killed. And it hardly made a ripple in the United States. They were just African Christians. And by saying that, it makes me mad. I've worked in Nigeria. I know how brave some of those African Christians are. Taliban's 20-year victorious alliance with China against the U.S. and the Uyghurs. Whoa. Taliban in China? Radical Muslim, radical leftist, Marxist socialism. It's everywhere, friends, if you care to see it. Israel to simulate striking Iran in massive drill. Oh. We had this massive drill practicing to take out the Iranian nuclear facilities. Meanwhile, ISIS was plotting to assassinate George W. Bush in Dallas. They got stopped. They were going to come over the border. Christian nationalism or gay Sharia, there is no option C. This is written by somebody who wants Christian nationalism. It's The Stream, a Christian news site. The Subtitle is kind of interesting. Monkeypox super spreader gay orgies are essential, but church gatherings aren't. I don't know if you understand what that meant. Every August, there's an event in New Orleans, one of the two sin cities of the U.S. It's called Southern Decadence, where 200 to 300 homosexuals gather together for a big orgy party. Southern Decadence. Well, in 2021, monkeypox was on the loose, which is a sexually transmitted disease primarily among homosexuals. Although the CDC didn't want to say it was primarily among homosexuals, they just said sexually transmitted disease. But you have Southern Decadence coming on. And the CDC couldn't find the ability to speak up and say we should not have this event. But they could tell you your churches were non-essential and had to be closed. Really? The political left is much like Islam. They want your churches closed. And so they said, Christian nationalism or gay Sharia, there is no option C. I'm here to tell you there is. Option C is a good name for it. It's in the center when you get caught in the middle. Just like Jerusalem, just like Jesus. Loving people on both sides, including the people at Southern Decadence, because Jesus loves them too. I have friends that have come out of that lifestyle and can tell you the miraculous things that God does to change a person. Israel and Iran, 5 minutes to Armageddon. Jerusalem's planning must anticipate, that's if they attack Iran, must anticipate Hezbollah, Hamas, and other Tehran-backed militias aggressively responding in kind if Israel launches a raid into Iran. In all likelihood, before Israel's air forces could return to Israeli airspace. Massive volleys of rocket fire would be hitting the country from Lebanon, Gaza, and Syria. Let's see. Since Saturday, there have been rockets that came from Gaza, 5,000 or more, Lebanon, and Syria. And possibly even Iran itself. Striking Iran's nuclear facilities would only be the beginning, not the end of a hot war between Israel and Iran. Prepared or not, Israel and Washington both appear to be out of time. Iran's threat is substantial, and it is only intensifying. Until now, Jerusalem's war between wars covert approach against Iran was sufficient to tactically frustrate Tehran's nuclear ambitions. It no longer is. Measured in doomsday clock terms, it's 5 minutes to midnight in Jerusalem and Tehran, and in Megiddo, the historical biblical site of Armageddon in Israel. Don't know if you've noticed, we had a caliphate established, Islamic State. It starts going down, and a new power takes over the role, Iran, who wants to establish the caliphate now. They're both Islamists that want the caliphate in Jerusalem. Al-Qaeda's next leader has deep ties to Iran. Interesting, the lines are blurring between groups. Al-Zawahiri, the leader of Al-Qaeda, was killed in Afghanistan. Afghanistan said they didn't like Al-Qaeda, but they were holding the leader there. Not holding, giving him safe haven there. And the new leader is holed up in Iran, where they're giving him safe haven, and they say they don't like Al-Qaeda. In other words, it's exposing the lies. Radical Muslims are beginning to help each other more and more because they all want Al-Quds. Shanghai Cooperation Organization showcases growing ties of China, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Internationally, the red-green axis has significantly strengthened since Biden came to power as the world realigns in America's absence. December of 2022, Netanyahu returns to prime minister, and he's got coalitions that's the hardest right-leaning government Israel has had. Except it caused mass mayhem within the political structure of Israel, and they've been fighting with each other until Saturday. They were fighting with each other and didn't see an attack coming, and they just unified to take out Hamas in retaliation. We had a war begin in Ukraine. What does that have to do with anything? A lot. Look at Russia's allies. China, Marxist. North Korea, radical Marxist. Iran, radical Muslim. Syria, radical Muslim. The radical left, radical Islam coalition. Who are they fighting against? The secular West, mostly. NATO, the former Christian world. Basically, what was known as the Christian world. The king of the north and the king of the south in Ukraine. I don't know if you realize it. That's pretty much the same division as you're seeing since the attack on Israel. It's the same alliances. It is a global fight that has begun. January of 2023, Putin's allies call for Berlin to be nuked after Germany's game-changing decision to send Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Oh. Russia keeps throwing around the threat of using nuclear weapons. If you're Russia and you're up against the wall and your allies are China and Iran, what do you want them to do? Be peaceful or launch their own military attacks? You would want them to launch their own military attacks to divide and conquer. You may be watching that happen. China, is there any chance it might attack something? Taiwan. They're all on the verge of not doing. Unprecedented joint military exercise tests U.S.-Israeli readiness against Iran. I want you to notice just a couple of things happening in quick order here in January. January 26th, still the same week. Stakes rise as Iran can fuel several atomic bombs now. This is released while the U.S. and Israel are practicing how to take out Iranian nuclear facilities. At the end of those practice, there is actual attack. A drone attack on an Iranian weapons factory really blows up the factory. Everybody says Israel did it, and Israel, of course, says no comment. But everybody knows who does it. It would be Israel. Xi visits Russia. That's the dictator of China. It remains to be seen whether this confrontation will heat up, pushing three nuclear powers to the brink of World War III, or merely marks the opening chords of a Cold War 2.0. But Xi's visit shows sides being taken with China, Russia, and Iran. If you pay attention, you're going to see the radical Marxist, radical Muslim coalition almost everywhere you look. The king of the South is pushing on the king of the North. Biden administration pushing Arabs towards Iran. That's March of this year. Iran says it will destroy Tel Aviv and Haifa at the slightest Israeli action. Israel does anything to irritate us, we will take out these places. That may not have been a mere threat. Ayatollah Khomeini marks $6 billion thing on 9/11 with a speech celebrating America's demise. When does the United States finalize a deal for a prisoner swap and giving Iran $6 billion? On 9/11. The timing was weird. And Khomeini comes right out and says, we're going to use the money for anything we want, and it shows America's demise. And the political left keeps on making deals with him when he says those kind of things in return. Growing number of people on U.S. terror watch lists encountered at the border. Again, this is all date order, folks. Approximately 160 non-U.S. citizens on the watch list attempted to cross into the United States in 2023. So far, that was in September. Oh, yeah, by the way, they didn't try and cross at the gateways. They tried to cross in the wilderness sections. They caught 160 so far this year. What did a couple hundred terrorists do to Israel last week? Or less than a week ago? You got more than that here. That's all I'm saying. Times of Israel. Giving unheard of assent to Saudi nuclearization, Israel girds for Cold War with Iran. Here's what was happening just before the attack on Israel. American officials still think of Iran as ultimately rational and able to be deterred. As if they hadn't learned any lessons yet. This is after what happened on 9/11, 3 days later, after they got it thrown right back at them by the leader of Iran. A regime full of sound and fury, but ultimately devoted to its own survival and stability, and thus loath to engage in conflicts it cannot be sure to win. The Israelis think of Iran rather differently. It is a revolutionary regime willing to destroy nations. And then, on the 7th of October, on the 50th anniversary of a surprise attack against Israel. Israel's 9/11, this was Drudge Report, headlines that day. First war in 50 years, 600 plus killed. We now know it's about 1,000 killed and 3,000 wounded. Mighty vengeance is the Israeli response. They say they are going to change the Middle East for good in their response. Do you know what the name of the operation was for the Palestinians? Alaska Deluge. They're out to set free the Alaska Mosque, the Dome of the Rock. They're out to get Jerusalem back. Oh. Conservative Review, New York socialists rallying for Palestinians day after terrorists kill around 1,000 Israelis. The radical left, after watching that terror attack, comes out to support all over the United States, the Palestinians against Israel. All over the world. Iran helped plot attack on Israel over several weeks, Wall Street Journal. Across the Middle East, a surge of support for Palestinians as war erupts in Gaza. Way down in the article, there's this little blurb that is really important. On Sunday morning, a day after the attack, another signal arrived in a major Saudi-owned newspaper. In a column, Tariq, I don't know how to say his name, Al-Hamayed, the newspaper's former editor, criticized Hamas and Palestinian factions for waging what he called a useless war. He accused them of trying to sabotage the prospects for Saudi-Israeli normalization and of serving their Iranian backers at the expense of the Palestinian people. Iran does not want to see real peace, or specifically Saudi-Israeli peace, he wrote, because if it happens, it will be the peace that will change the face of the region. Very interesting. Saudi Arabia, while negotiating with Israel, says we support the Palestinian people, but in the negotiations, they were willing to let Israel not make force Israel into giving up much concessions, because they wanted a deal, and the Saudis are tired of the Palestinian problem. Because the Palestinians won't take enough land to have their own land. Remember, the Crown Prince said they both have a right to exist. The Palestinians always say, no, it's not enough. We need everything, or we keep fighting. And they turn down one deal after another. They always have an attack when somebody's trying to make a deal, which is what you just watched. And although the crown prince is mouthing the fact that he wants the Palestinian people to have their land, he only wants them to have some land, not all of it. And you have this article coming out that tells you the Saudis still want to normalize with Israel, and the Palestinians better get in line or they could get left out. Even in the midst of all this, there are signals that some Muslims are tired of the radicals. Daily Mail, Russia and China refuse to condemn Hamas atrocity. As Western nations express anger at terror group, Moscow and Beijing only comment on violence as Iran praises Israel's horror. Okay. In times of Israel, European leftists panned for casting blame on Israel over brutal Hamas attack. The left and radical Islam everywhere. So let's look at this as we're closing this part of it. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. Radical Islam and their allies, the radical left, attack. It's happening all over the world. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. I don't know if God's going to let it go through this time. He stopped it in January of 2020. He let us go through COVID, which should have been a wake-up call to all of us to get serious as we see how governments will try to control us, even our own. And now it's heating up very fast to where it dropped off. I can't tell you how long you have, but you may not have much time. God may let it go. And it will be like a whirlwind, very short and very destructive once it goes. But the good news is that means Jesus is coming soon right afterwards. That, my friends, is good news because pain and suffering will finally end. Now, radicals overthrown, moderates follow the king of the north, and some escape to follow Jesus. Let's look at that. Oh, which is more dangerous? The north, the south, the left, or the right? I will answer it. The side you lean towards is more dangerous for you. Because if you're leaning left, you know the dangers of the right, but you ignore the dangers of your own side. You're used to covering them up. If you're leaning right, you know the dangers of the left, but you're used to covering up the dangers of your side. And the side you cover the dangers for is the one that will deceive you and take you out. Be very careful. The side you lean towards is the most dangerous for you. And what's going to happen? The world has swung over towards the left, and it's about to come swinging back, and it's going to be nice for a little bit probably. You'll be given a little bit of freedoms as it swings through, and then it will go over, and they will take away your freedoms even worse. Based on the prophecy, that's what's coming next. Ever heard of the Inquisition? That's about a good description of what's coming next. That's what Daniel compares it to. The description of the Inquisition and the description of what's about to happen in the third conflict are almost the same in Daniel. We'll get into that more as we go, but let's look at those that escape and are delivered by Jesus as we close. These shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and Ammon. A few verses later in 12:1 it says, and at that time your people shall be delivered. The same word as escape in the Hebrew, everyone who's found written in the book. These are God's people that are delivered, but it's the same word here. So these Edom, Moab, and Ammonites are delivered when Jesus comes and delivers his people. That means they're following Jesus as Lord and Savior. Revelation 17, and those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life when they see the beast. You're either in the Lamb's book of life or you follow the beast in Revelation. Well, Edom, Moab, and Ammon don't follow the king of the north and they're not overthrown by the king of the north. That means they have to be in the Lamb's book of life. You have a group of Muslims that are following Jesus. Thessalonians said, and they shall not escape, but you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief. The people who escape are those who are trusting in Jesus and following his word. Edom, Moab, and Ammon escape. Amos says it this way, On that day will raise up the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down, and repair its damages, and rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the Gentiles who are called by my name. When Jesus restores the Davidic kingdom, it has Edom as a part of it. Edom, Moab, and Ammon in Daniel are delivered by Jesus. The prophecy of Amos matches. That's repeated in Acts 15, verses 16 and 17. But if you take a look at the Davidic kingdom, I want you to notice Edom, Moab, and Ammon were all parts of it. They were within the kingdom, and Jesus restores it. So Edom, Moab, and Ammon are a part of his kingdom. There's a group of Muslims that trust in Jesus as Lord and Savior. We already saw anyone who trusts in Jesus Christ, Jew or Gentile, is considered a part of his Israel. Ephesians 2 says so. The new covenant, Jeremiah 31:31. The new covenant is with the house of Israel. If you're a new covenant believer, you are an Israelite. Everyone who's trusting in Jesus is a part of that Israel. And then there's this one, Joel 2:28. And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. All over the world, by the hundreds of thousands, Muslims are having dreams and visions leading them to Jesus Christ. A Muslim will have a dream. In it, he will see a man in dazzling white, or she will see a man in dazzling white. His name, when given, often it's just the man in white, but sometimes it's Isa, which is their name for Jesus. And he tells them that he is their Savior and they should trust him to be forgiven of their sins. And that he has a book, the Bible, that should be their authority for life. And we have hundreds of thousands of Muslims that are following Jesus in the Bible all over the Islamic world. I have a couple of friends who work with these movements. One of them runs a website that Muslims go to after they have a dream of a man in white. And he communicates with them. I have another friend who runs an underground movement that has several 100,000 Muslims that are followers of Jesus Christ in it in Muslim countries. You don't do that out in the open. People would die. But I will tell you this, they don't claim to be Christian. Really? Really. I will tell you, when I walk into a mosque, and I do it quite often, I will take a bunch of brochures with me when I'm in a city with a mosque, and I'll walk into the mosque for noonday prayers, their main event of the week. I'll take a stack of these things, Islam and Christianity and Prophecy seminar. And I'll invite them. I'll ask to talk to the leaders of the mosque, and I'll tell them that I'm a true person of the book. I say, I'm a true person of the book. I don't drink alcohol. I believe the whole book, not half of it, and several other things that I tell them. I tell them I'm a follower of Isa and the book. You know why I don't say I'm a Christian? Because if I say I'm a Christian to a Muslim, do you know what they hear? I'm a follower of the Pope, a crusader. I am not a follower of the Pope. I'm a follower of Jesus and the Bible. And so I go in and I tell them I'm a follower of Jesus and the book. I'm a true person of the book. You see in the Quran, it says there are true people of the book that are to be respected. They don't think the Pope is a true follower of the book, and he's not. I don't want to be confused. And so these people all over the world in my friend's movement, they don't say that they're Christians. They say they are people of the book and followers of Isa, Jesus. And they're getting away with talking about Jesus and the Bible as your authority for life in many mosques. Sometimes political events can get kind of personal, though. when the United States pulled out of Afghanistan the way they did, my friend had many of his Afghani helpers killed. Politics has real problems with this world. But exceedingly good things are happening. I will just tell you, I've talked personally with many Muslims who had dreams and visions that led them to become followers of Jesus. Here's the numbers. About 2/3 of Muslims who become followers of Jesus had a dream or a vision leading them to do so. Joel 2 is in the process of happening, and if you read carefully, it says, before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And if it's happening by the hundreds of thousands, what is God telling us? Daniel 11 is happening, Revelation 11 is happening, Revelation 13 is happening, Joel 2 is happening. How many happenings do you need? God could still put a hold on it. He did in January of 2020. But he may not. It seems like these waves are getting closer and closer together, like God's saying, wake up, it's about over. I hope you wake up and follow Jesus. I just know it's exciting to be involved in some of this stuff. I'm going to skip that. So what should a true Christian do? Well, you don't want to join the king of the south. The king of the north is going to come rearing back in and take away our religious freedoms from the other side. Well, I guess that leaves you with staying in the middle, loving people on both sides like Jesus. Pretty good option, actually. But now you know what's going on all around you. And you'll never watch a political or a historic or a news event quite the same when you know who the sides are and you're watching them form up for the last giant push. Do you know what comes right after this third conflict? A short time of peace where God's people, those from within Christianity and those from within Islam that join together to follow Jesus in the Bible, give a last warning message, and Jesus breaks it loose. This awful stuff that you're watching is the lead-in to the greatest evangelistic event in all history. Yes! It's going to be great. Don't be discouraged. Start sharing the gospel. Muslims are saying, if Islam is a religion of peace, why so much bloodshed? Christians are saying, what's wrong with Christianity? People all over the world are giving up Christianity and religion of all kinds. Why? Because they don't see the real thing. And you know what God is doing? He's about to put his true thing, real living followers of Jesus, they're going to get caught in the middle where the whole world can see him, and these people that are looking for a real example to follow are going to go, there they are. That's what I want. And he gives us the greatest evangelistic opportunity of all time. God uses everything for good. Don't forget it. He's using the awful for the good. And so, papal-led Christianity overthrows Islam and its allies. Papal-led Christianity is left in control. What happens next? That is tidings from the east and the mark of the beast. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and skip the response thing because of time. I'm going to say this, though. I forgot to change this slide. At 9:30 Saturday morning, I'm going to do the times of Daniel 11 and 12 here. It's going to talk about the 1290 and 1330, 1335. I've got a DVD back there on it. If you're interested, you can buy it or you can show up free and watch it here in person. And at 11 o'clock, I've changed the sermon. I am doing What Was I Thinking? Have you noticed the extreme burst of mental illness problems in our world? I'm going to share with you when I went through a depression and what I learned about it and the answer in Jesus. And it's actually related to some of this stuff. 9/11/2001 was one of my triggers out of many. But it's what was I thinking? And what you'll learn from that can change your life. It changed mine. And so I encourage you, watch it in person or online or whatever, but I think it's going to be well worth you watching and participating in. And we're just going to go over here. Tidings from the East and the Mark of the Beast is our next presentation. Let's close with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for your awesome word. Lord, Daniel 11 has never missed a detail in 2,500 years, and we're watching everything teeing up for something. And it's all there. Lord, I ask that you not have people leave here fearful, but just excited to be living when all this stuff is happening and we get to be right there in the middle of it, sharing your love and your truth with people around us. We can't do it on our own. We need your Spirit living in and through us. Thank you for forgiving our sins and making it possible for us to stand at this time. We thank you in Jesus' name.